with 3 of the drag pins locked but not secured, and 1 completely unlocked. And we're lucky that nothing serious happened out of that.
This is I don't want to continually butt in and disrupt, but this is a classic example of you see some red, and you shouldn't see red. And again, a picture speaks 1,000 words. I mean, we're looking at pictures. You're right. It's really obvious when we look at the pictures that that's wrong.
Yeah, and yet this aircraft flew in that configuration.
I know, it's amazing.
It is absolutely amazing. One of the issues too that was identified in this particular one, and it's not uncommon. The club was in the habit of, after they rigged the glider and connected it all up, they would put tape around the hatch, and that would signify that it had been
no one touch anything.
Been done. And yeah, and that future DIs, no one's taken the patch off. And that was a problem the club identified that they
That's
actually
greater
had.
fool theory.
Pardon?
That's the greater fool theory.
Yeah.
That's subscribing to the greater fool.
Well, it is. And the other thing, anyone who's flown Astair types knows that those sleeves turn during ground manoeuvring and flight, and they actually come out of safety. So you have to check them every day, and you have to rotate the sleeve until the pin's in safety again before flight. But in the top picture where it's not in safety, it's still locked. But the safety's there as a final check to make sure that it's not going to pull loose. But they've got springs pushing against them, so the chances of them coming off when they're actually locked on, like the top one is remote, unless the spring breaks, in which case the thing could do something funny.
It just sorry, it's David here. Just for everybody, whilst I know a lot of us are desperately wanting to kind of contribute to this presentation because there's much to say, in the spirit of allowing Chris to get through to the end in a reasonable time, can you please hold your comments?
Yeah, I'll cut out. Sorry.
Despite how urgent they are, till the end.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. All right. Well, anyway, that was the last of the pictures. So we'll just get looking at threat and error management in the context of daily inspections. So as the previous examples have demonstrated, there are a number of threats and errors, and some of the typical threats that we need to look at is sometimes poorly designed fittings, sometimes differing types of connectors. So some people might think they understand how they go, but we've already seen in this little presentation here that there are a variety of fittings that do the same thing. Hard to reach and see areas is a problem. People take the shortcut and try to feel their way through without trying to properly look in there. Not having the appropriate tools or inadequate tools on hand. Then there's the physiological stresses that we've got on people. People could be stressed or fatigued. Psychological, people could be frustrated, or they could be experiencing other negative feelings. They didn't really want to do the DI, but they've been told to go and do it. Could be under time pressures. There could be interruptions from people coming. As I mentioned earlier in the piece, the rudder spring was missing. The DI inspector was about to fix it when he got interrupted, and then he forgot about it. And then, of course, there's distractions. So they're the things that actually threaten what we're doing, not having the appropriate stuff and being distracted and all those things. Then, of course, we've got the errors and things that can be made, which is not checking the maintenance releases for the glider being inspected, not checking the maintenance release for the validity and defects. That is the maintenance release still in date? Have any defects? If there are any major defects in the maintenance release that would prevent this aircraft from flying? We've had aircraft flown with the maintenance release was not signed. Aircraft flown where the person didn't check that any scheduled maintenance, either recurring or required by the manufacturer, had been done. Failure to properly secure control connections, failure to secure wings and tail planes, not following through with remedial procedures like the rudder spring issue I said. And one of the ones that I didn't mention in there, which the Geelong boys will be familiar with, one of their standard Jantar was flown where the elevator attachment bolt was not in safety, and they only found that after they were de-rigging the glider from an outlanding, I believe. So these things are not uncommon, and we just need to pay a bit of attention that these are the sorts of things that can happen. So what can we do to prevent these sort of mishaps? One of the key things is, as mentioned before, about taking photographs, and that the key thing is you've got to be familiar with the aircraft systems you're inspecting. You need to follow the daily inspection procedures diligently. Now, they could be procedures that are actually written in the flight manual, or they could be the GFA's Form 1 procedures. We shouldn't succumb to time pressure. We need to take our time and do things properly. If we're fatigued, we need to understand that we're fatigued and be more careful and conscientious. If we're interrupted and we go back, we've then got to work out where we were. And if we really can't figure out where we were, then we need to go back and do it all over again. We must always maintain situational awareness, be aware of what's going on around us at all times. And we need to seek help when uncertain. So, no matter what level of experience in all critical tasks, we need to ask ourselves, what are my threats today? Am I taking unnecessary risks here? And how will I manage and mitigate any of the threats that I identify? Remember that well-meaning, motivated, experienced people can make mistakes. You can be fatigued, distracted, there can be stress, you can become complacent doing it over and over again, and there could be pressure to get the job done. And all these things are common factors that can lead to human errors. And inspectors can minimise the risks by adhering to sound risk management practices. Thanks. So, do we have any questions on all that?
Not so much a question, Chris. Roger speaking. But to say that in the airworthiness group, you'll find that in the daily inspection maintenance release, rather, the page which has the picture of the glider and a sequence of things to do, that is being revised to bring out very clearly that the first task is to go through the maintenance release. The second task with the glider is to inspect the rigging and controls, because nothing else you do after that makes any sense. No point in worrying about tyre pressure and any of that detail unless the glider is rigged properly. And you'll see that most of the things Chris has talked to are rigging issues. And I've been accumulating some more information out of the British Gliding Association of the issues they've had with rigging. We didn't used to focus on rigging being the number one physical activity to follow through with. We picked up on this matter following input from Gary Sunderland in 2010 when Gary was reflecting on all this. And he actually went back to the national gliding school conducted in the very start of trying to get gliding organised in Australia. And that's one of the first lessons they learned in airworthiness at the National Gliding School. So Gary said, hang on guys, we've got to make the rigging in the glider and the connection and controls the number one thing to do. And that has been put at the top of this page in the maintenance release, but it hasn't been explained as clearly as it will be in what is going to come out. And what is coming out is that there are 4 parts to checking the rigging and the controls. There's actually the structural connection of wings and tire planes in place. That's one consideration. The second consideration with the structural bits and pieces is that the appropriate safetying of the main spar pins and is correct. So that's a second element. The third element is to actually deal with my apologies. Putting things together involves also putting the controls together and checking their safety. And then we come to the 2 last steps of the 4, which are to check the controls by restraint and check the controls by full free behaviour. So you'll see a little change at the top there. Ultimately, the detail for data inspecting is you have to come down to your own pattern ultimately. But what we're trying to do is get people to start correctly, consistently, all the time by checking the rigging. That's enough for the moment, Chris. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Roger. I thought this has been invaluable for me. I'm an amateur,
Good, thanks, Peter.
but it's been a very valuable lesson. It's essentially strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and being professional enough to admit when we didn't quite do it right.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we don't get all of these things reported, which is disappointing because the more people report, the more we realise where the problems are, and then we can sort of start addressing it. And as Roger has correctly said, the Airworthiness Department has actually been looking at this very recently because of the number of reports we've been getting through the system. So if you've got to report things, otherwise we just don't learn any lessons from these things.
Even if I make a trivial mistake, if somebody learns a lesson out of my mistake, that may well save somebody's life.
Well, that's indeed right. I mean, you know, everybody's mistake is a lesson for somebody else to learn from.
Absolutely, we don't want to repeat the same one. That's
correct. And if we don't report the lesson, that's a lesson lost. You know, if we don't report it, it's a lesson lost.
Exactly. You've been fantastic, Chris. I'm going to sign out. Thanks. It was a great session.
No, thanks, Peter. Good on you. All right. Now you wanted me to have a quick chat about the flight reviews and what's changed. So,
Please.
one of the we've had a fair bit of feedback as a consequence of rolling this out, and you wouldn't believe it, but the number of people who are very experienced and intelligent people have been getting their knickers in a knot because now we've got this concept of an online exam as part of the pre-learning. And I've been accused, well, the ops panel's been accused because it's not me, it's the ops panel. We've been accused of, you know, of rolling this out without properly consulting and, you know, and how dare we make these decisions of such import without going back to people on this and letting them know what was going on. And they were complaining about the short time frame with which we rolled it out. I can talk about the time frame in particular because this has been with CASA, probably was with CASA for 7 months. And in the end, I said to them, look, everything I've written is around rolling this thing out in August. It'd be really good if you could pull your fingers out. And they did. They gave me the week before the end of August to roll it out. So that's why it was rolled out pretty quick. But this thing about you know, springing it on everybody is a bit of a furphy because this flight review that we've introduced was consequent of probably the largest consultation process in GFA's history. Normally when the GFA makes changes to rules and regulations, the decisions are usually made by the GFA regional operations panels, which consist of the CFIs and level 3 instructors. And they're the ones that usually make the decisions about regulatory changes. Some changes are a consequence of CASA making changes. But in this case, because it was the flight review and that every pilot in Australia has to have a flight review, we actually sent an email out to every pilot. So this flight review system that we've got here is actually based on, well, it started from member feedback from the various GFA satisfaction surveys, where members were expressing a strong desire for GFA to align its flight review process with the rest of aviation, not only within Australia, but also overseas. And that was to introduce a 24-month cycle on the flight review. the problem we had is that the GFA cannot unilaterally change the requirement for flight reviews because the requirement for an annual flight review is in the GFA operational regulations. And those regulations required all silo pilots to undertake an annual flight review in accordance with the GFA instructor's handbook guidance. So the change that we needed to get to move away from the annual to a biennial, not a biannual. Biannual means twice a year. Biennial means every 24 months. So to change to a biennial flight review system, we needed the approval of CASA because we had to change the regulations. We also knew that before we could go to CASA and say, oh, look, you know, we now want to change from a 12-month system to a 24-month system, that CASA would ask us, well, what's your safety case for change? You know, and how have you mitigated the risk of moving from a 12-month system to a 2-yearly system? And the other thing we were cognizant of was that we needed to, whatever we came up with, it needed to be based on current thinking and the competencies that aligned with aviation training philosophies internationally today, in today's climate. So what we did was, as a panel, in order to come up with a case for change, we actually did a fair bit of review. And the New Zealanders who have actually gone down the Part 149 path, which GFA is currently working towards, they've already solved this problem, and they've got a comprehensive flight review regime in place. We also had a look at the British Gliding Association's system. We looked at the Soaring Association of Canada because the Canadians, New Zealanders, us, and the Brits, we have all very, very similar training systems. And we also looked at what the Soaring Society of America did, bearing in mind that the Soaring Society of America does not regulate gliding like the GFA does. In America, gliding's regulated by the Federal Aviation Administration. And then what we did was, because it had to go through CASA, we had to look at what CASA's guidance and competency standards were, so that we could ensure consistency with the CASA rule sets. Because if you're going to get CASA to approve anything, it's a lot easier if they're familiar with what you're putting up. And they reckon that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so we went with that when dealing with CASA. So the outcome of reviewing all this information was that we put forward a 20-page consultation document. And this document outlined the case for change, the proposed new structure, and a series of questions and answers in there to explain exactly what our thinking was. On the 5th of July 2019, so this was just over 12 months ago, the consultation process began. And what we did was we advised all members with a flying category membership. We sent an email to them, and we asked CFIs to let others know who might not have email. We sent an email with a link to this 20-page consultation document, inviting everybody to have a look at the document and comment on the proposal. And the document itself had a form that allowed people to fill it in and comment, and they could they had the option of saying the proposal was acceptable to them, it was acceptable with change, and then they had to nominate what the change was, or we asked them whether, if it was unacceptable, they needed to let us know why they felt it was unacceptable. And as I said before, this was the largest membership consultation for a rule change ever conducted by the GFA. Some 2,282 members actually received the email. There were a few emails that didn't get delivered for various reasons. And as I said, they were asked if the proposal was acceptable changes or unacceptable. We know that 1,870 members, so 82% of the members that were emailed, they actually opened the email, which is a good thing. And 696 members, or 31% of them, actually clicked on the link to view the consultation document. Now, that's about as far as we could go with analytics based on an email delivery. out of those 31% that actually looked at the document, 9% of our members, 195 members, actually responded to us with useful feedback. And the responses were as follows. And as you can see, the vast majority were in favour of the proposal as it was submitted. So the final document, which is what was pushed to CASA in December last year, was influenced by the suggestions from the people who said that it was acceptable with changes, and even was influenced by people who were not acceptable. The thing was not acceptable to them, because a lot of the time people didn't accept the proposal because they felt that an annual flight review regime was the most appropriate for a lot of our members, and their view was that we should always work to the lowest common denominator. So we took everybody's opinions on board. We didn't necessarily agree with everything that people told us, but we tried to be as collegiate as possible by taking in as many good things as possible and making the final outcome acceptable to the vast majority of members. So this change from moving from 12 needs to be looked at in some context, and the context is around the total GFA training and checking regime that we've got. So in the current regime, all students have got to fly dual until they're checked safe for solo. So this is not going to affect our student pilots. We have further check flights and reviews conducted during a pilot's progression to the A certificate. Then they have their first single seat conversions where they're under supervision. When they fly private passengers, they get checked out. They get checked for independent operations, and then finally on through to the glider pilot certificate. Then occasionally people get further training, coaching and reviews during a pilot's progression to high performance soaring, conversion to new glider types, and in some cases people moving into the instructor ranks. So overlaid upon this is a requirement for pilots to retain skill in airmanship and currency. And we've got prescribed 90-day currency requirements for instructors. For charter pilots, we don't have any charter pilots at the moment, and passenger flying. And then on top of that, the majority of our clubs have also got check requirements for pilots appropriate to the type of operations that are conducted by the clubs. And the most common type of requirement there is a requirement for a 90-day check flight. So if you haven't flown for 90 days, then you can undergo a 90-day check flight. The GFA didn't want to legislate a 90-day check flight. One of the things that the GFA doesn't like doing is writing lots of rules. So we recognise that a lot of clubs do have these requirements, and the clubs are allowed to do that. And so there was no need for us to legislate for that because it was being done in any case. And the other thing is too that we have individual pilots are able to self-assess their own skills and requirements, and they can request flight reviews and checks at any time, or even ask for further training and coaching opportunities. And we know that the majority of our pilots do actually ask for check flights when they feel they're uncurrent. So we felt that the current system was we already had a reasonably good system for currency and proficiency that would allow us to extend the flight review out from 12 months to 24 months. So the question is, what has changed? And this is the real question here. What has actually changed? Well, the first thing that we've changed is we moved from a 12-month flight review to a biennial flight review regime for pilots meeting certain conditions. Now, we recognise that some pilots who fly very little, and we know that my own club just this weekend, just yesterday at our annual general meeting, the CFI noted that 50% of our members were in the red zone in that BGA barometer that we use. So 50% of our members were in the red zone for hours, and 30% of our members were in the red zone for number of flights. So just looking at that, you can see that there's probably a number of pilots who don't fly very often. Those are the sort of people that might require a more frequent flight review than a 24-month flight review. and clubs still have the option to tailor the period between flight reviews to meet the skill sets of the pilot under training. The other change that we've made to this is that level 3 instructors will now assist CFIs with the conduct of instructor BFRs, and this will allow the GFA to discontinue the current requirement for a flight competency assessment at the 4-yearly flight instructor refresher course. One of the problems with the flight instructor refresher courses that we identified fairly early in the piece was that it wasn't always easy to actually get the flying component in, and then try to follow up with the flying component at a later date was then problematical. And then the question was, well, when does the person sign out for his BFR? Was it when they attended the course, or was it when they finished their actual flight assessment? So we've decided that we're going to remove the flight competency assessment at the 4-yearly flight instructor refresher course, and that's now going to be conducted as part of the biennial flight review. So that's going to simplify the process no end. The other thing that we did was we introduced the concept of recurring online examinations, and these were to test the candidate's knowledge of regulatory and other relevant matters as identified from time to time. The examination is open book. There's no time limit. You can take the exam as often as you need to. There are no consequences for a fail. And what the results of the exam will do is identify gaps in anyone's knowledge. Everybody who takes the exam will get an email with all the questions and answers showing which ones they got right, which ones they got wrong. And the idea is that they can use that to identify knowledge gaps and upskill themselves. A fail on the exam does not influence the flight review. It is just a pre-learning component to identify gaps in knowledge that the instructor might be able to address with the student during the course of the flight review itself. And in many cases, you'll probably be able to look up the books yourself and realise, oh yes, I realise now why I got that wrong. So the key thing is there to remember, it is open book. You can take it as many times as you like, and there are no consequences for a fail other than you might learn something. We've also included a mandatory lookout and scanning assessment, plus stall spin recognition and recovery and prevention assessments for stall spins in dual control gliders. So that's been continued. It was mandatory before, it's still mandatory now. We've now included other exercises that we're flexible on, and so the idea now is that the flight instructor or the assessing instructor will sit down with the student under review, and they will go through a bit of an interview process to find out what it is that the person under review really wants to focus on at this particular flight review, because this is a training opportunity for them and nothing else. So the idea is that there'll be a mutual plan made for what will be assessed, and that will be carried out. So there'll be some mandatory things in there on lookout and some stall spin recognition, recovery and prevention assessments, but the rest of it is between the pilot and the flight instructor as to how far and how detailed the flight review will be. We've also, in that, having said that, we've also referenced some baseline competencies around flight management and threat and error management. So these baseline competencies are what the instructor is going to be assessing the pilot against. And we've also introduced a standardised notification of flight review assessment report confirming demonstrated baseline competencies. The majority of our larger clubs in Australia already have a notification of flight review type form. So we've decided that we will keep that sort of thing in, because it's it goes on the pilot's record when they complete their flight review. They add a credential and they upload a copy of their notification of flight review, so that there's a record on their profile as to how they performed, and that goes to professional development, or their own development as a pilot. It doesn't stop. It won't stop clubs using their own forms if they feel that their own forms can add value. They can still use those, but the GFA form is the one that needs to be filled in and uploaded to the member's profile. So if we look at the philosophy and intent behind what we've done, we need to understand the flight review has got to be seen in the context of broader aviation safety. So the flight review, although important and required by legislation, is one process that contributes to continuing pilot proficiency and consequently the safety of flight. And a flight review every 2 years is not going to ensure safety, but safety is achieved when each pilot takes responsibility for the continuing process of hazard identification and risk management. That is, threat and error management for their own aviation activities. So if you want further information on this, I suggest you have a read of Ops Directive 0220. This is the document that formally extends the flight review period for pilots exercising command privileges up to a maximum of 24 months. Then there's Operations Advice Notice 0120, which actually provides the guidance to pilots undertaking the flight review. It also provides to their instructors and those who may conduct a review. And then finally, we've put a comprehensive question and answer page on the GFA website. If you go to the GFA website, go to the, I think it's Member Services tab, there's an operations section, and in that operations section, there's the Q&A for flight reviews. So that's all I wanted to mention on this. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Chris, is it okay to do I mean, my annual flight review is not till January next year, but if I'm going to be doing other people's flight reviews before then, is it okay for us to do the tests just to get a feel for what's in them and how to log on and all of that?
Yes, you can. You can do the test at any time. I mean, we're not making this secretive. It's not an exam in the context of what you might sit if you're in the university or doing a CASA test. There is a significant question bank. There's about 230 odd questions in the question bank, or a bit more for instructors. The question bank is basically comprises the ABC questions and answers that our students are already doing. It includes the flight radio telephone examination. We've added some human factors information there. We've had some feedback on the human factors that people think some of the questions are not really flight related. The knowledge that's in those human factors questions will certainly improve people's knowledge. Some of them don't really affect piloting of an aircraft, you're right, but nevertheless, those questions were taken from the CASA private pilot syllabus. And a lot of the stuff can be answered by looking at our human factors manual from the documents and forms library. And you can also use Google. Google's a good source of information. And for instructors, we added some questions around leadership and instructing type questions. So you can do them anytime you like. And if you find errors, I mean, it's possible there's going to be errors in there. Rather than go on the GFA forum and say, that we're all wankers because there's, the questions aren't even right. We prefer that you would just come back and say, look, you've made a mistake in this particular question and we need to fix it. I must admit, I was a bit pissed off by people going on the forum and, having a go when all we're trying to do is improve the system and improve our pilots' knowledge. So just bear that in mind. But yes, they're easy to get to. You go into your profile, your new Go membership profile. If you on the top left of your Go membership, there's a menu tab, and I think it's just three bars. It's a menu tab. You click on that menu tab, and you get a whole heap of these little coloured tiles. And one of the tiles is the My GFA tile. When you click on that, it automatically logs you into the My GFA system, and that gives you a whole heap of other little coloured tiles or oval box or oblong boxes. And one of those is the online exam menu. And if you go to that, all the online exams will be there. And you just click on the link and you can get access to it. The online exam system is an external system that we pay a little bit of money for to be able to use. We don't have any control over the way you've got limited control over the way it shows the questions and answers. There's a tip that I can give you, that when you do the question and you hit the next button, if the question is wrong, the question will be highlighted red momentarily, and it won't flick you to the next page. So it lets you know that, oh, you've answered it wrong. So you can have another shot at trying to get the answer correct. But as I said to you before, it doesn't matter if you don't pass. All you have to do, the only requirement for the flight review is that you actually sit the exam, because we want to enforce people's getting back into the book. So you have to actually sit the exam, and so your instructor wants to see the email you got, or if you pass it, you can just show them the certificate, because clearly if you've passed it, you've passed it. But if you don't pass it, show them the email you've got, and then you can explain, yes, oh look, I've looked this up and I understand where I went wrong now, or I don't understand this, can you please explain it to me? And that's the whole purpose behind the book, is just to improve the exam is to improve knowledge. So yes, Paul, to answer your question, you can go in and do it anytime you like.
Something to do in lockdown.
Thanks, Chris. I found it very useful. In fact, I think I've gone through the question and answers about 6 times now to keep improving my knowledge and play with the system a bit to see how it works. One couple of observations. One is that when you don't pass the exam, it comes up with fail. And one of the things that you talk about in there is that we don't want people to feel like failures, and it's a learning opportunity. So having the word fail in there is probably not the term that I would have as a preference. I would be saying that there is opportunities to go back and learn a few more things before you have another go at the test or something like that. And I noticed that was in the little quiz that was put into the I think it was the VSA magazine that popped around recently.
Yeah, thanks for that. As I said before, it's an off-the-shelf system. We've got limited ability to be able to change it. I do agree that we really, fail can be a really bad word. I'll have a look and see if it can be changed, or some way we can do it differently. But if we can't, we just need to tell people, don't get bogged down with it. It's a pass or fail. Failure is not a problem in this, because nobody's keeping tab. It's only between you and your flight instructor. Nobody else sees the exam results. Nobody's checking up to see how many times people do the exam or anything else like that. So I hear what you're saying. I'll see whether we can do anything to change that. I'm suspecting that we probably won't, because it's the way the system works. So just if we can't change it, just make sure you sell it to the people that it is a private thing. Nobody's checking it up, and it's only between the individual who sits the exam and their instructor who sees the paperwork.
So on that note, there's no email that goes to the CFI, is there?
No,
not unless they purposely forward it. So in fact, really, it's people can sit the test as many times as they like, and then take their best attempt to their instructor for their BFR.
They could, if they wanted to do that. If they had the inclination to do that, they could do it. If they haven't got the inclination, they can just say, "Oh, I'll let it go. I failed it. Well, no big deal. I'll go and talk to my instructor."
Yeah.
But look, try to sell it for the positives, because I'm not sure it's something we can change.
Yeah.
Because as I said, it's an off-the-shelf system. I think it's run by IMS or something. I think they call themselves. And we pay. I think we only pay a couple of $100 a year for the system, so it's not like we've got a lot of influence over the whole thing. But as I said, it only goes to the member. Emails don't go anywhere else but to the person. And here's a twist: you actually have to put your email address into the system, because it's not linked to your profile. So if you put your name and I've seen this, somebody put their name down as test1, and they put their email down as test@gmail.com. So when they passed, they got a certificate saying that test passed it. They would have got a certificate, but they didn't get the certificate because there was no actual email address for it to go to. So it's not linked to your membership profile. You actually have to physically put in your own details. So you put your name in there, and that name goes on your certificate. If you pass it, we're on to the email that you get, and you have to put your email address in, otherwise you won't get anything. So if you put your wrong email address in, you won't get a response. So it is very, very private.
Yeah, no, that's good. And as I said, I've tried it out multiple times. and found it to be really useful. The fact that it sends an email with the answers and what you got right and wrong is a great way to learn from the mistakes. In terms of the question bank, you said there were about 200 questions, but my observation after completing it about 4 or 5 times was that most of the questions, at least 90% of them, were the same for each of the tests.
You will for one. I think the instructor one. I think the bank's only got 12 questions for the instructor one, and you've got to answer 5. So the chances of getting repeat ones on that is pretty high. Most of the others have got about 30 or 40 questions in the bank, and you're only asking 5 of it. So I suppose the odds are that you will get a repeat of them every now and then. The more you do it, the more chances of repeating you're going to get.
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's good.
It's very hard to write these sort of questions and answers. It's very, very difficult, and a lot of the questions and answers actually came out of CASA, CASA private pilot license textbooks put out by the Aviation Theory Training Centre, and other ones were ones that we tried making up ourselves. So it's pretty difficult. We don't care. I mean, we don't really care that you might get the same question a few times. Where it will be important is when there's regulatory change. The important thing for us to do will be to keep the exams up, keep pace with any regulatory change, especially around the radio procedures one and the airspace legislation, because they change a fair bit.
Yeah, no, that's good. One of the things that I have found in the past is when people need the annual flight review, it's usually on the day, the last minute, they say, I've got to take this passenger up, but I can't fly yet until I do my annual flight review. And so then there's this mad rush to get the annual flight review done so they can take the passenger up.
Yeah, well, they've got 2 years to plan it now.
Well, that's right. And the fact that they've got to complete the Q&A first, and then we need to sit down and have a conversation around their flying, and they've got to complete the form and put their hours in and all the rest of it, means that we need to spend a lot more time going through that a lot more thoroughly. So, and the fact that we can set our own date, it doesn't have to be 2 years, is really good. Because if you do have a lot of pilots in the red zone, as you described earlier, then you could say, well, because you don't fly very frequently or haven't flown frequently in the last 12 months, let's do an annual flight review, or repeat the flight review next year at this time again. So the club can set their own dates within that framework.
Yeah, that's a good point about that. I had a club in Queensland, actually. The CFI sent me an email. He said, I see in the flight review advice notice that we're allowed to set 12-month flight reviews. He said, our panel is thinking of introducing 12-month flight reviews for all our members. So we're not going to change to a 24-month cycle. He said, is that acceptable? And I wrote back and said, no, it's not acceptable. One of the problems one of the things we've got to be mindful of is that the flight review is a training exercise. It's not a check flight for currency and things like that, like you might do for a person who hasn't flown for a period of time. It's actually to be used as a bit of a training exercise, and it's to improve the pilot's flying and knowledge and skills, introduce them to new things, and to recover things that they may not have done very often in the 2 years before, for example, spinning. And so the GFA operations panel's expectation is that the majority of our pilots will be able to get a 24-month flight review, but we acknowledge that there will be a number of people who won't be, who would be better off with a 12-month or less frequent flight review regime because they don't fly a lot. From what clubs need to understand, what instructors need to understand, is that if your club treats your members different to what my club treats mine and what the rest of the clubs are being treated, your club members could claim that your club's discriminating against them. And then you've got the problem of them being able to justify, when you get a member protection complaint, why you're only doing 12-month reviews for your members, whereas other clubs are doing 24 months. And the reality is that there are people in your club who, a 24-month flight review is not going to be a problem for. But there are other people who you'd be prefer to give them a 12-month one. One of the things that the GFA review form